thank you so much for joining me on Marketing Espresso today. I'm so excited to have you here. And I think everyone listening is going to be really loving this episode because it's very different to everything else that
Thank
we
you.
do. So
Thank
I'm
you,
really
Becca.
excited.
I am too. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, a bit of background. Rob and I have just been speaking for like a good hour because we get along a little bit too well. So this episode may end up being a long one. It may not. So it might be a little bit longer than you guys are used to, but I think there's going to be so many nuggets in here that you're really going to enjoy. So Rob, talk to us about empathy in marketing.
Oh my gosh. You know, marketing, empathy, to me, kind of go hand in hand. Like you can't do marketing if you don't have empathy. Whether you're in a sales role and you're trying to persuade somebody to buy a product, whether you're, in an R&D sort of brand management role, you're trying to come up with a new product service, you need marketing or empathy. You need to understand the needs, the wants. You need to see the perspective of your consumer so that you can make those better products or services. Similarly, if you're doing advertising and marketing communications, you've got to understand the point of view of your consumer, where they're coming from, if you're going to try to persuade them to buy into your brand or change their perception of your brand. So empathy is it's a key factor in all business, in all business roles, but in particular in marketing, because we're not just dealing with each other. Like you might say you work in finance or something, you're dealing with, your other accountants and whatnot. But in marketing, you're dealing with consumers and they are different from you. They are not you. So you kind of have to step into some discomfort and get to know who they are and understand their perspective and see the world from their point of view.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, over our conversations, because we actually have talked before this as well, you already sparked so much thoughts in me, because you were already explaining to me all the different kinds of empathy. And I could absolutely love you to dive into that for us, because I think when people think empathy, they just think, oh, I need to emotionally connect with someone. I need to understand them in an emotional way. And we instantly go to that emotional kind of, I guess, belief around empathy. But you've explained to me that it's a little bit deeper than that.
It is a lot more complicated than that. And there's a lot of misunderstanding of empathy and what it is and how to use it. And so, yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to demystify some of it. And the first thing that I like to tell people is we are all born with the ability to have empathy, just in the way that a baby is born with the muscles that they will ultimately be able to walk and run with in their legs and stand. We're born with the ability to have empathy. We just need to have those opportunities to strengthen those muscles, just like a baby starts to crawl and then gets stronger and is able to stand, and you're giving it opportunities to then walk and then ultimately run. We need those same opportunities around empathy to build those muscles up and to get stronger. So that's kind of the first thing. We're all born with it. The second one is, I often describe empathy as this E word people are afraid of, like emotions, and like, ooh, scary, uncomfortable, no. And it's not as scary as it sounds, because empathy isn't all about feeling the feelings of somebody else as them. That is one type of empathy. It's emotional empathy. But there's another type of empathy that's called cognitive empathy. And that is what I believe we use and need to rely on more often in our day-to-day interactions, whether it's at work or if we're running our errands and going to the market or whatever, or dealing with our neighbors. It's about cognitive empathy. It's about seeing the point of view of other people. And that's more rational. It still has some kind of connection to the heart, but it's a much more rational exercise that's in the head. You're trying to see where somebody else is coming from. And you use that as like another data point in your decision-making or whatever it is that you're having to do.
Yeah, I love that. You actually described it to me in the first time that we chatted. You described it to me as you took it back to like the dawn of humanity.
Oh, yes. When we're living in caves.
Yes, I would love you to do that for everyone listening, because this blew my mind, actually. Because I think people still probably would get confused between like okay, cool, cognitive empathy. How do I switch that on? Because
Right.
yeah, because
Yes.
like a lot of people probably actually do struggle with that because they're so, we do get stuck in the way that we've been brought up and all of those things. So talk us through it.
All right. So, yeah, going deeper on emotional and cognitive empathy. So, imagine we're back in cave dwelling times, and you've got the people that are living with you in your cave. Those are the people, they're probably your family, they're probably some close friends, maybe, and they have the same kind of values, beliefs, rituals that you do. So, you probably have more emotional empathy with them. You can feel what they're feeling because you're so close and tight knit. And then cognitive empathy is what you use when the people from the cave down the road come over to visit. And they look like you, they might sound like you, but they have different rituals, beliefs, opinions, and behaviors. They are quote unquote other. And that just means that they literally aren't living in your close knit, immediate community. You don't understand exactly where they're coming from. You can't feel the feelings that they're having. But let's say they come over and they're like, hey, we just developed this thing called farming. And so we want to take the land in front of our caves, cut down all the trees, plant stuff, grow it, and we'll be able to eat off of that. If you're in the hunter-gatherer cave, you'd be like, what? You're crazy. And apologies to any paleoanthropologists. I know this is also totally like mishmashing mashup of land of the lost sort of analogy here, but let's just keep going with it. So you've got the folks from the farming cave, and we're in the hunter-gatherer cave. I can't totally relate to their emotional needs, but I can understand where they're coming from. They've come up with something new that's going to help them provide for their family. And I can relate to that because I've created the rapid fire bow and arrow system, or I don't know what that would be, but some way to hunt better, hunt more efficiently, the semi-automatic of hunting back in the hunter-gatherer days. So I get that because I want to feed and provide for the people in my cave as well. So you've got these two different caves, and you're not necessarily going to get to an emotional spot, but you can see where they're coming from. And by understanding like, okay, I get it. You're going to, you want to do this. You want to clear the land here. Great. We can now start to collaborate and problem solve together and maybe ideate a solution because I understand where you're coming from. And hopefully you from the farming cave are going to understand where I'm coming from when I say to you, well, you know what, we need this patch of trees here because it's got some symbolic significance to the people in my cave, or the children love to climb those trees or whatever. We can't totally clear that out. And they might go, oh, okay, that's cool. We got it. And that's how cognitive empathy works. So think about like when you're leaving your cave, it's all the other people that you're running into. So it's everybody that you work with. They're other from you. You may be on the same quote unquote team, but they all actually dwell in different, caves.
And I think when he was describing that, the only thing I could keep thinking of, well, at the end of the day, we all had the same basic need. And the same basic need in that sense was to feed the people in our cave, like to feed our tribe, like, and I think that's I think that's really cool. Actually, it's a really great easy way to understand it, and it's a really great easy way, like if you're thinking, do I need to be more empathetic, to those around me? Well, it's actually not that hard to switch on because no one's asking you it's just about understanding. It's not about actually getting the emotion and getting to that emotional spot, which I think, honestly, every single time I've heard empathy described before, it has always been around that emotional, like, oh, if someone's like crying, should you cry with them? Or like, and that's considered empathy. It's like, well, no, it's so much deeper than that. And I love that description, even though it was a great analogy, actually, Rob. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's expanded since we first chatted. I keep adding to it. There's more details. Like this was the first time I used the semi-automatic bow and arrow system because, as you can tell from my accent, I live in the States and it's just a little crazy over here right now.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing I was going to say to you. We are living, and I think a lot of business owners I'm talking to, and you mentioned you're having similar conversations, and just a lot of people in general at the moment, they're struggling because our world is shifting a lot. We've had 2 years of lockdowns, COVIDs, like depending where you are in the world, you've definitely probably everyone's been affected. Like I think, every single person can say they've got a story from the past 2 years of a day that they were struggling, or, something they've had to overcome. And businesses also have really, we've had to see them, and I'm going to use the word pivot. And now they're like, can we just pivot back to the way it was before? But the truth is, no one actually really wants to go back to the way it was before. So we're seeing this, I think, so right now in business, in society, in everything, I think empathy is really important.
It's huge now more than ever. And, give me an example of when the genie got put back into the bottle. It doesn't happen that way. You never go backward as much as the US Supreme Court wants us to. So sorry.
No, that's totally fair. That is a fair comment.
You can delete that later if you need. So anyway, yeah, Blue State Marketing Espresso. Right here.
It's good. We have international guests now.
We do. You do. Yeah. So, okay. Where were we? Oh yeah. Everyone needs something. So yeah, I mean, we are all walking around with like PTSD in some form or another. We're all wounded more than we have been. And one of the things that's been driving, they call it the Great Resignation here in the States, that millions and millions of people are leaving their jobs every month for perceived greener pastures. And a lot of times the reason why they're leaving their job, the surveys have found, is that they weren't feeling support from their leaders from an empathetic perspective. And starting all the way up at the C-suite, but even to their individual manager. And they needed that. Like they had kids doing cartwheels behind them during Zoom calls, and like it was mad.
Or partners walking behind naked. I think that happened a fair bit.
Exactly. And so you have to, and we weren't given that. That's, I mean, rarely do I find a manager training manual that's available, but certainly how to deal with, Zoom calls and all the things that were going on wasn't part of it either. There was no training that was already set up. And so we were all doing the best we could to adapt, and it wasn't always good enough for many people. And so you've seen this huge shift and movement that's happening. And so now it's upon leaders to brush up their empathy skills. Like it is a whole new world. Like there's a big reset button that's been pushed. And that's why you're seeing, yes, there are some companies where the leadership is saying, nope, we're paying a lot for the rent. You're going to be back in the office 5 days a week. That's what's important. And some people like that, others don't. Others are in this hybrid situation, and others are like, hey, we can be fully remote. That's all good. And we're all working through it. And we need to have some empathy. We need to understand the points of view and where everybody's coming from. So if you're a leader and you're having to make those decisions, you need to listen to your employees and understand where they're coming from and things that are going on. They may have found that they're more productive or feel that they can contribute in a better way when they're working remotely from home, because they don't like the distractions of the office. They don't really care about the politics, and they want to be an individual contributor and kick butt. And that's great. Or maybe they want, they've grown in appreciation for coaching, their parents or their kids' football team and helping out in the intramural sort of space, and that engagement and that time with the family. So leaders have to be adapting to that and having empathy and listen. And really that's about listening and taking in that point of view and then considering it in the decisions that are being made.
Yeah. And I think the same can be said for consumers too, because consumer behavior has changed too. Like, we've seen like during the pandemic, everyone thought, oh my God, like the global economy is just going to die. But interesting, I don't know what it was like in the US, but in Australia, we saw like e-commerce just go through the roof.
Oh
And then,
yeah.
but now it's dived a little bit, obviously. So people like, well, how do I keep getting these consumers coming through my store? Like, and I think there's a way that we can use empathy to make that happen as well.
Well, and and we've seen the same thing here in the States, the e-commerce, the ordering online, some of it's order online, pick up in store, BOPIS as they call it, or just order it and ship it to me. It has grown significantly. And yeah, things are going to settle, but they're never going to go back to the way they were. They're going to find a new sort of stasis, a new, I hate the word, but normal. And so, yeah, you've got to be constantly paying attention to how your consumers are behaving and what's driving their behavior and their decisions. We're talking to some consumers right now because there's inflation going on, and it's pretty high in the United States and in other parts of the world, and our gas or petrol prices are also astronomical compared to where they usually are. And we, with the exception of a few cities in the US, we do not have good mass transit. That is just not an option for most people. So you have a car, and it's probably a larger, SUV pickup type vehicle, and people are consuming lots of gas, and it's become really expensive. And yet your paycheck is only what your paycheck is. So what are the trade-offs that people are having to make right now? And that might be your brand. You don't necessarily know, and it's not always in the obvious. The conversation I had with a consumer today was really interesting. He was talking about, shopping at Costco, which is the big warehouse retailer. I think they're in Australia, but if not,
yeah, we do have Costco actually. Yeah, not many,
so,
but we've got them.
Yeah, so you're buying in large quantity and everything. And he was talking about how the price of like these frozen lasagnas had gone up from $15 to $22. And he was like, it's crazy, it's too expensive. So he's not buying them anymore. And it wasn't because he had and he's retired, so he doesn't have a ton of cash coming in, but he's comfortable. And I asked him, so like, what's driving that decision? Is it because you need the money for gas? You're trying to move things around? And he's like, no, it's just too expensive. I don't want to pay it. And I was like, well, what would get you to buy it again? And he was like, Costco will do a sale at some point where it'll be $17, and maybe you have to buy 2 of them. Then I would buy it again, but I'm not going to do it at 22. And so it's like, okay, what's really changing he has a price value equation, and that lasagna has now it's out of balance, and he doesn't see the value in a $22 tray of frozen lasagna. So they've lost him as a customer. And you lose too many of those, you're going to lose sales. Even though you've increased your prices, your revenue is going to go down. So they need to find that sweet spot. So you've got to constantly be listening and thinking about how your consumer is reacting, understand what that point of no return is for them. What's that $22 lasagna equivalent? And then include that in all of your calculations, because there's obviously other factors going into play. You may have, labor shortages in your factory, and the costs for labor are going up. The costs of ingredients are going up. Supply chain issues. You're dealing with gas prices, and transporting your stuff to the Costco warehouses has gone up. So, but you've got to consider all of that as you're taking your decision on what you're going to do. Maybe it's better to shrink the size of the lasagna to keep it below $20 and keep the consumer, versus what we've always done and pricing it at like 22.
Yeah. And I think the lesson here is start asking the questions.
Yeah.
Because often as businesses, we're like, okay, we know that we're going through this tough time. We know that, we're facing XYZ, and we're just going to do XYZ as a response, rather than actually surveying our greatest customers, the people that are super loyal. Like that lasagna customer is so loyal. And so asking those questions, understanding what's making them drive at the moment, that's how we can make informed decisions and get through these tough times. And, I've often talk about the fact that some of the biggest businesses we see today were born out of economic downturns, or, and tough times, so it's real, especially in the US, there's a lot of major companies that were born in like 2008, which was
Yeah.
like, how did that happen? But the truth is, it's the businesses that are doing this different style of marketing, as in consumer-based marketing, like true consumer-based marketing, like understanding the people that it is you're serving, that are going to make it through. And you're right, like, why shrink the lasagna by like a little bit? Cadbury does it all the time here, and people get outraged.
But they still buy it.
100%, because people are addicted to chocolate, but that's a whole other discussion.
Right. Well, and the ice cream manufacturers here in the US, I think it was during the Great Recession in 08, 09, they reduced the pint size. So ice cream is no longer the imperial pint that it used to be. It's like 3/4 of a pint. And they look a little funny on the shelf, but it's at the same price because they found, I think there were some articles so people could go into the great Googleverse and find it. Haagen-Dazs and Ben and Jerry's brands here in the US did that. And there were some articles about how they found that consumers had this threshold. They weren't going to go above a certain price point, but still wanted their chubby hubby. And so they were, and not that they were trying to make their husband chubby, but
it's a type of ice cream.
flavor. Yeah. Just to make sure people were clear. Yeah, that they still wanted the ice cream and they were willing to sacrifice a little bit of it and not have to pay too much more. So it helped them maintain normal ultimately. Like they could have what they wanted, great premium brand of ice cream, but not sacrifice elsewhere and have to trade off.
Yeah, I love that. I think honestly, Rob, you've given us so much insight into, I think, especially at the moment, because people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, they're feeling a little bit fearful. And I think that as leaders, we actually have to lead the way as to how to get through these times. And that is building that empathy muscle. And I love that you describe it as a muscle. So one question I'm going to ask you, how can someone start today to build that empathy muscle a little bit more? Like, what's a tip that you would pass on to sort of start using that muscle?
Yeah, can't just share one tip, so I'll share a couple. So
I love that.
I think the first thing I would want to tell people is like, don't be afraid of this. It does take some courage to have empathy, and yet one of the big things I hear from leaders when I talk to them about empathy is they're afraid that they're going to be seen as weak if they display empathy. And actually the opposite is true. Empathy is another data point. It's going to help you with all of the different skills you need, communication, the decision making, all the stuff, to be a better leader, and to be a stronger leader and to make stronger connections with your teams. So that's the sort of first thing. Have that be okay getting uncomfortable with this. And then there's 5 steps that we've identified over the years at my firm, Ignite 360. We've been doing a lot of engagements with consumers and clients and helping make that connection. And we've just seen these barriers happen, and looking at some of the other research that's out there and consulting with social scientists and psychologists. And so it boils down to 5 things. The first one is to dismantle your judgment. And that's actually, we're talking about being judgmental, not making a judgment. You still have to and making a judgment would be to decide to shrink the lasagna tray or raise the price. You're making a judgment call there. Being judgmental is casting aspersion on somebody. It would be discounting that consumer that I was talking about because, oh, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Oh, he's just one retiree. Who cares about, them? And that judgment comes up. I'm not kind of making all these things up. So that's something you've got to dismantle, because you're never going to understand who they are and have empathy with somebody if you're being judgmental. So that's the first point. The second one is to ask good questions, and that's to be really open. And I won't get into it here. Maybe we do that on another espresso shot. But you want to ask why without asking the question, or using the word why. You want to ask more exploratory questions, things that help people understand and feel comfortable sharing where they're going. And if you can ask those exploratory, open questions that don't threaten people, you're going to get much richer information as a result. And that's going to it's just more information. It's going to give you better data. Third step is to actively listen. And that's about being present in the conversation. Put your cell phone aside, put down the laptop, and pay attention. Like, really actively listen with your ears as well as with your eyes. Like, what are the nonverbal cues that are coming up from somebody that you might be sensing? And use your intuition as well. What's your gut telling you? Humans are one of the few species that will ignore like the hairs standing up on the back of our arms or on the back of our neck when there's danger or we're worried about something. And that's our intuition telling us like, no, don't go down that dark alley. We ignore it and go, oh, but it's a shortcut. I'm going to go there. And then bad things happen. And, your intuition's like, told you. So when you're talking to somebody, trust your gut. What's your gut telling you? Like, maybe there's something else here I might ask and I should ask and inquire about and introduce that topic. The next step, the fourth step, is integrate into understanding. So that's making sense in your head that just because I like chocolate ice cream doesn't mean somebody else can't like vanilla ice cream. Like, no, the reality is there are different ways, different types of ice cream that people like. Some people like their lasagna with spinach, others do not. That's okay. Don't be judgmental about it. Be curious about it instead, and make room in your head that there are different points of view. And if you can understand that, then you can start to explore and have conversation about it. The final step is using solution imagination. So that's when you've cleared the other things out of the way. You've really gotten there. You feel like you've got this connection with somebody. You're at a place of empathy and you are stepping into their shoes and imagining what it might be like for them to experience something, and then continuing the conversation with that understanding in mind. So you're trying to clarify for yourself and get even more, information, more connection, more understanding. And ta-da, you've reached empathy.
I love that. That is great. And they're actually actionable points. Like you can go away and you can actually start realizing in conversations, am I listening? Or am I worried about how many likes I've had on that Instagram photo? Or, like it sounds lame, but that's what people are like these days, right? Like, we are glued to our phones. So I love that. I think every single point you've given there, you've exactly taught someone how they can engage in being more empathetic and build that muscle. And one day it'll just become subconscious that you do that. And I love that. I love it. Thank you, Rob. I think that's fantastic. And look, I think I'll wrap us up because we could talk forever. But thank you so much for joining me today. It's just been amazing. I think so many people are going to get so much from this episode. So thank you for your time.
Beck, thank you so much. This has just been such a joy.
Yeah, likewise. I'm sure we will do another episode.
I look forward to it.